Welcome to Little Steps Live. This week we have a very important topic that we'll talk about, which we will introduce our guest. But first, just want to send over a couple of reminders for our viewers. Little Steps Live, for those that are joining us for the first time, we go live every week. Monday at 2:30 is the preferred time. We do change the time here and there, so do keep in touch on our Facebook page. The easiest way to keep in touch in terms of which events are coming up next is just to go to our events tab, where we'll be listing up every Facebook Live over the next couple of weeks. You can click on if you're interested, and you'll get an automatic reminder direct to your phone. That is the easiest way to keep in touch in terms of the upcoming topics. So Little Steps Live, we do bring in cool interviews. We do a lot of resources from experts, one of which we have with us today. And we try to make it real in terms of what the timing is suggesting. And right now what we're seeing is that it is a big time of relocations. It's what we call the Great Migrations. And I think for a lot of us, we've seen a lot of friends that have announced that they're going to be leaving over the summer, or friends that are saying, hey, I'm moving to your city as well. Summer is a time, because of the schools, that you see a lot of people making those big life changes, moving cities, coming in and out. So today we wanted to bring over an expert in the area of making that transition easy. So we've invited our friends over from Crown Relocation and Mobility, and I'd like to introduce our guest today, which is Shylu, who, you've got quite a title here, so I'm going to read it here. It's a APAC Regional Manager for Intercultural Language Training and Partner Support Practice. And we'll go into what exactly that means, because it is a big role to help families, kids, partners, people that are coming over for jobs, adjust into the new culture that they're coming in. But she also does a lot with repatriation, which we're going to be talking about as well, for those that have been, say, in Asia for 15 years and are heading home, and they need to kind of understand what are some of the struggles that they themselves, as well as their kids, will face when heading back. So we're going to be covering all those topics today. I think it's also important to let you know she's a mom of two. So this is coming both from the job side, but also from a personal side as well. So she's got a lot of personal stories to interweave within the conversation as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce Shylu. Shylu, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into how you got into this position, became an expert in this area.
Sure. Well, I've been with Crown for 15 years. I've lived in Hong Kong for 16 years. And my role, as you explained, is a very long role. And it really covers the family support services that Crown can offer for international assignees. Crown's obviously known as the movers. We're always identified as the trucking people that move people from one country to the other, but we do a lot more than that.
Right.
So when I first started with Crown in the early days, one of my first roles was to be a destination services specialist, where I would do orientations, take people out to the supermarkets, and we're still doing that. So I've got that experience of really showing people what Hong Kong's like
right.
when they're coming out on preview trips.
Right.
Or they're just doing their housing, for example. They wanted to go see typical housing overviews, see what houses are
also
like.
What areas to live in,
Exactly,
those kind of things. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and also have a look at the transportation as well. That's really important to them. So I started off doing that, and that was a great way of meeting families in the early days when they were moving over to Hong Kong, and just giving them a really realistic overview of what Hong Kong's about,
right.
and even from a cultural aspect too as well. And that would be a one-day orientation as such. So then I started also moving into more of a corporate side, where I would work with accounts and really understand more about the assignees and what are some of the struggles that they have when they moved into living in Hong Kong. My role has expanded now into Asia Pacific, so I don't deal just with Hong Kong. This role that I have with Crown is primarily with the corporates, because for intercultural training, it's usually part of their policy. And language training too. For example, some of the corporates allow expats to have 100 hours of Mandarin when they move to China. So they contact Crown to organise the language training. I don't personally do the language training, but we have trainers that do.
Right, you steer them in the right direction.
Exactly. So the cultural training, as I mentioned, is one of the parts of the policy, and it's not just for the assignee, it's also for the partner and also for the children too as well. And that's like a really important part of moving into a new country, because you talk about culture, you don't talk about the do's and don'ts only, you don't talk about how to hold chopsticks in the restaurants, it's much more deeper. So the cultural training programs are led by experts in different countries. And with the language training, we're really homing in on giving the assignee and the family the basic survival skills and just being able to communicate with the locals.
So much. And we're going to get into more of what those tips are, but it is quite interesting. I do think it's an important thing to mention that Crown, as a company, you do think of it as the movers, but the fact that you do provide all these other services, you're helping the whole process. You're helping them move in, getting the cultural needs that they need to kind of quickly adapt into their new home. And I think because our audience is a family audience, it is important to really touch on some of those areas that you've heard from your clients about what to prep before, what to prep after you arrive, and then some of the other tips along the way, which we're going to get into. Quick reminder as we kind of move into these three areas, if you do have any questions as we move along through the chat, please just put them right up there, comment. Also share with any friends. If you've got any friends that are in the process of a big move. This could be a move between Singapore and Hong Kong. It could be a move from Hong Kong to the US, tag them. I think this is definitely a conversation that they'll appreciate, and one that will shed light into some of the areas that maybe not everybody's thinking about during these moving days. So we're going to cut the conversation up into three main areas. It's going to be relocation, which is before you arrive. So we're going to talk about what are the things that we should be thinking about before you actually get to that destination. Then we'll move into after you arrive, when all the cultural things actually set in. You've got your new home, school has started. You've got concerns, in terms of what the children have questions about. So we'll cover that. And then the third area we'll be talking about repatriation. So we'll go ahead and start with what happens before you arrive. So when you talk to clients, it is nice to be able to reach them before they actually kind of make this big move. I know a lot of clients probably come to you after they've made the move,
right.
But before the big move, what are the most common worries that you hear from your clients? Before they actually arrive.
So families usually tend to be really worried about schools. That's the number one priority, and they want to understand.
And that can be a deal breaker.
Yeah. Exactly. They want to understand what are the schooling opportunities, what kind of curriculums we have, and we have education consultants that work with them. One of the main tips for schooling is always to sort of look at the child, and not all schools fit every child, and so some parents sort of think, should we apply to 6 different schools? Of course, that's not always the right case.
Right.
Giving them sound advice, what would be the best curriculum, and how it would suit the family is always the best way forward. So schooling is always a top priority, and housing.
Yes.
Where am I going to be living? What do I bring? Do I need to bring, all my fridge and everything else, all my appliances? Will
Yes.
they fit? And what do I take and what do I leave behind? These are really important questions a family needs to understand. The spaces as well, what are the typical housing areas, and what kind of apartments will we be living in?
Yeah, for many it's a big adjustment going from Texas to Hong Kong, for example. Space is definitely a big change.
Exactly, and not having a garden and those kind of things. So the concerns are usually around that, housing, schooling, and what we also want to make sure people are going well prepared.
Right.
So we give them tips on, making sure their immigration papers are all in place. You have to make sure the visa process is, done. Otherwise,
right.
You're going to
and there's some waiting time.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure your certificates are translated. Everything's all ready to start putting in, because it does take time.
That's
and
right.
if there are some issues, it could delay the process of the family relocation. So those are kind of the main areas that we make sure we get a chance, if we get a chance to speak to them, because sometimes people get less time when they're told they need to move.
That's right.
Not always a luxury.
How much? When you look at your clients that you've worked with, how many actually know 6 months in advance, and how many know 3 months, 1 month? What do you see as the trends there?
So usually with families, there's a lot of advance notice.
Okay.
Usually single assignees are the ones who are ready to come, can move quite quickly and they're mobile. But with families, there's at least about I'd say ideally 6 months notice. But of course, there are situations where it's not always so clear cut. So, it can be done. It's daunting. Moving is very daunting. There's a lot to deal with. There's a lot of issues as well. You've got to prioritize. So
right.
It's important to sort of remember there are people out there to help you and get through those checklists.
Right, yeah, big checklist too.
Absolutely.
And in terms of, I know a lot of families do a look-see. Is that something that you're still seeing as a popular thing to do?
It's a great way of at least getting an idea of what to expect. I mean, like I said earlier on, I used to do this. I mean, go out to the supermarkets, even take the MTR, show them how the octopus card works and everything, because when you're moving from another country to the other, you're always wanting to know what are the networks like,
right.
How are you going to get around. So look-sees are important, and especially if you get a chance to go to see some typical housing.
Right.
That's a great way of understanding what am I actually going to be getting when I move over to Asia.
Yeah, and I think also the communities. When I look at the different areas that I personally have lived pre and post children, it is very different. If you live on the island or if you live in Clearwater Bay, or and it's different from country to country, right? So those look-sees are quite nice to kind of get a feel, because it is sometimes hard to just do the research online all the time.
Yeah, research online can sometimes be very misleading, especially with the apartment searches. You can't really tell how big an apartment is until you've actually seen it.
That's right, yeah.
So,
in fact, my first apartment, I remember we signed before we got here, and it was actually 2 apartments.
Wow.
So we had A and B. As a newlywed, where in the morning I would unlock A and I'd go into B. So definitely check into those little things. Schools. This is a huge concern for families. What are your top tips around selecting a school from abroad? I think that's a big one, and navigating the application scene, because obviously it's a little wild.
Yeah. So with schools, you've got such a varied selection in Hong Kong, Singapore, in all over Asia. And I think one of the top tips that we say to families are, you can do your research online, but if there is a chance to come out and visit the school and actually see what the school's like, it's a great way to get a feeling. Schools are really welcome tours as well if you're visiting. But I mean, one of the things that I've always found with families is that they panic, and it's important not to panic about this, because you will find a school. It might not be your top school priority.
That's what everybody says. You will find a school.
Absolutely.
I have never met anybody that has not found a school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of nervousness around that.
Absolutely.
And that's understandable.
Yep.
And so the idea is to sort of at least prioritize at least 3 or 4 schooling systems that you're interested in, and be open, because there are some newer schools that have come out in Hong Kong, and that's one of the things that we have faced the challenge is that everybody wants to go to the most popular schools, and the schools where obviously the fit of curriculum works very well.
Yes.
But just be open to different types of schools, and there are some really good options around the region.
Absolutely. So before we move into the next kind of phase, I do want to kind of just recap on everything. On the relocation before you arrive, we did go through a lot of the different tips in terms of what to be prepared for, touched on schooling, touched on things that families should look for, the checklist, these kind of things. Do we have any questions before we move into the next set of questions, which will revolve around after you arrive? And if not, we'll just plow right through. Any more questions? Is there anything else you want to touch on before we move into before you arrive to after you arrive?
I think we're good here.
All right. So now the big decision. You've gotten on the airplane, you've got the kids, and you have arrived into your new home. What are the typical concerns that crop up, that first week? I think the first week, that first month, the first couple of months can be quite stressful in trying to figure it all out. But maybe we'll break it down in terms of what the different family members can experience.
Sure.
So for those that are taking a job, what are those challenges that you typically see in the first couple of weeks?
Sure. So when you have the relocation phase, and I don't know if you're familiar, we talk about the different stages of cultural adaptation.
Right.
So we talk about it all being fantastic, honeymoon period, everything's going really well. And this is for both the assignee and the spouse. I mean, it can be, demonstrated. Some people actually might not even go through this.
Right.
But, it's actually like honeymoon period. It's fantastic. I love it here. I'm really enjoying working in Hong Kong. It's great. And then suddenly you sort of realize things are not quite expecting, what you expected it to be. And there's a slight dip, and you sort of think, okay, maybe I wasn't really, I didn't realize this was going to happen. So in the workplace, challenges do creep up, and people don't actually think about it till they've actually had a chance to absorb what's going on. So usually 4 to 6 weeks after arrival, you see that kind of okay, all right, maybe my team members are not so forthcoming in meetings as I'm used to back in the US, where everybody would just voice out their
Right,
opinions
right.
and everything like that. So communication styles are different. The hierarchy in Asia is very different too as well. I mean, of course, Hong Kong and Singapore are a little bit more modern, but sometimes if you're working with a Chinese team, if you're working out in rural parts of China, and
Yes.
it's a different sort of workplace environment to
Right.
what you're used to. So those cultural gaps start to be more apparent. And that's when an assignee, what we call, relocating assignee, might just think, okay, I could deal with some more information. 'Cause
Right.
Nobody
That
actually
makes
told
sense.
me.
Yes.
Nobody tells you, what am I
And I guess
supposed
it's
to do?
different for every person. Some people it's a big change,
Absolutely.
while others they just kind of coast through and deal with it themselves, or whatever it may be. So
And also nowadays, the kind of trend that we're seeing, we're not seeing the typical relocating assignee who's coming straight out of the US to China. They might have lived in France for a couple of years. So
Okay.
we call them serial assignees, where they've been
Oh.
on a couple of assignments before they actually move into Asia. So they've already
give us some hearts if you're a serial assignee family. That's a new term.
Yeah, exactly. Because that typical assignee, usually corporates are looking to move talent around. That's the
Right,
idea,
okay.
right? So if they've picked up, they want to bring in somebody that's actually got the skill set, that's worked in another country, and then it's great because they're coming out to Asia for the first time.
Right.
So then
yes.
working in France could be very different to what working, of course, in China is. So that's a whole different ball game. So those are kind of like typical challenges for the assignee.
Yeah.
Now partners, and we're very, very much about partners being involved in cultural training programs. We feel that when we do our programs for assignees, the partner must be involved. They must understand more about the Chinese culture,
Right.
why it's important in the workplace as well as in the social setting.
Absolutely. It's a happy family. It's a big part of it. For sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for spouses as well, we have a partner support program, and a lot of people think, okay, what kind of program would that be?
Sounds fun.
So companies nowadays are more and more looking into providing partner support. It's not about finding a job. It's
Right.
about really dealing with building up your new networks, perhaps maybe starting a new career, or looking into some alternative study.
Right.
And so a partner support consultant would be assigned to the partner and would meet with them regularly over a 3-month period, work with them on their CV, perhaps give them some guidance on some of the local networks. So when you're new to a new country, you don't have those networks. And
Right.
especially in Asia, it's really important to build them. And we even, to the point, sometimes even we print a business card to get them, feel like they're affiliated with Crown, so they're part of the Crown Partner Support
Oh
Network.
wow. Okay.
And that gives them a chance to come into the office and meet with our consultant, have some really good chats about what they're going to do.
Right.
So the partner support program is growing more and more. And so in terms of cultural understanding too as well, if they're going to be going for interviews, what are the differences of interview styles maybe in
Right.
Hong Kong compared to what they're used to back in Europe or somewhere else?
Okay.
So even a mock interview style would be something that they would do.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so partner support programs are really important, and we do believe that it's happening. It's a bigger trend right now.
And what about the kids?
Okay, kids. Now, so of course, kids are the most adaptable.
Yes.
And we all know that. I mean, most families worry about the children, but they're the ones who can adapt the most. But the cultural training programs actually give a chance for the kids to understand some of the similarities of what they had in their home country compared to what they're moving into their new country
Right.
about. So with the adult training program, we build on skills and competencies and how to manage teams in Asia, for example. But with the children's programs, we're talking more about, okay, you're going through some feelings and some of these things are normal, and how do you cope with them? So some of the tips on coping with cultural adaptation. So
Right.
now, you might think to yourself, in an international school, they're going to be, obviously with lots of international children, right?
Right.
So then how are they going to, what's the exposure that they're going to get to Hong Kong Chinese culture? So letting them understand a little bit more about the culture gives them a more chance to integrate, and just sort of
Right.
understand, okay, I'm here in Hong Kong, and it's not China,
Yes.
but is it? Or what's the whole story behind it? Because you don't really learn that in school,
Yeah,
not in the
that's true.
international
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah.
So just getting a better understanding. Of course, they have the Mandarin classes.
But that can be challenging too, because I've met families that they go into their new school and the level that the kids are at in their language, Mandarin or whatever it may be, they've been at the school for years.
Right.
They need to quickly integrate with tutors or whatever to get them up to where they need to be. So there is that aspect as well.
Absolutely, and children go through the same sort of culture shock too as well. I mean, it might not be so apparent, and you might not realize it, but there are signs. Like they could be missing home. Of course, there's homesickness that comes in, and partners feel it too as well. So the cultural training programs really address those kind of issues. And we use the analogy of a roller coaster. The dips and the highs.
Yes.
So, sometimes even with children, you can see it in sort of getting angry, maybe things are happening and they're frustrated and they're missing things at home, but they're not actually identifying what those issues are.
Right.
And that can be really addressed with a children's youth trainer who would work with them.
Okay, and then with the kids, the different ages of kids, do you see certain kids adapting quicker than is it the older kids that it's a little bit harder, secondary, that kind of thing? So not to scare anybody, but
Yeah, the teenagers, of course. I mean, it's harder
tougher,
with the teenagers. Where different academic systems, new friends again. Younger kids are much more easier to move with, and it's always for a relocating family. If they're younger, it's a lot more easier for children to start fresh in a new school, and schools are really great. They help with budding systems.
Yes, they do. Yes,
and that's really good. I've seen that happen with a lot of international schools. They know beforehand when the child is coming in. They tell them about them, that they're moving from Japan or they're moving from India, and so they've got a better understanding about the child that's coming in. So they work on the children. So we've seen that a lot more. But for the older children, that's where the challenges come in place. And a lot of parents say to us, we enjoy having the cultural training programs because as a parent, as you know, kids tend to not want to talk to parents about what their issues are.
Right.
So if you have a third person coming in, a qualified youth coach, who can say it's okay to be worried, it's okay to understand that sometimes you're feeling homesick, it's all right to talk about it, and so it works really well.
Good. Yeah, some good tips here. I think we could go into it even more. I'm so curious. You work with so many different families, so you're getting lots of different, questions that come up that I'm sure parents can say, yes, that's similar to my family as well. Is there anything else in terms of the arrival stage that you want to touch on that we haven't?
Well, I think in terms of like I talked about the honeymoon stage, and everything goes really well, and it doesn't always happen to everyone. I just want to say that like there are some people, some families, especially if they've been on international assignments, it might not necessarily happen, but it might happen a little later down the line. It could even happen 2 years down the line. And so having that ability to sort of recognize those feelings and say, okay, it's normal, I do know that this is going to happen. It's important for a relocating family to talk about these things. And I think one of the tips that we have, even it goes back to pre-departure, but create an action plan with the family and say some of these things are some, when we move to Japan, this is what I'm going to do, and I want to make sure that this is the kind of things that I want to go visit or experience in the culture. And then when you are feeling a little bit down, you go back to that action plan and take those action points and go together as a family and do those things.
That's a good tip. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the cultural aspects, obviously it's a very important part of the transition. So I think that it seems that that's an area that you guys invest heavily in, is saying, hey, you should look at what's going on in that market. You should look at the language. You should embrace what the city has to offer. But in terms of the other cultural aspects outside of language and kind of learning, are there any other areas that you feel are super important for families to kind of put on that checklist?
Sure. So when we talk about cultural training, we talk about obviously, what Hong Kong Chinese culture is, but we talk about the values of the people too as well. So culture is all about the values, the behaviors, and that's important for families to understand. Like if you are living in Kowloon side, for example, now more and more families are living in Kowloon. They're not necessarily living on the island. You're seeing a different type of Hong Kong.
Yes.
And more families are moving to the other side now. It's in the early days it was the dark side, but it's no longer that, right?
Yes.
So Hong Kong has so much to offer, and so really like the deeper values of people and their culture, and even in Singapore. I mean, Singapore is a multicultural mix of different. You've got the Indians, you've got the Chinese, and you've got the Malay Singaporeans. So understanding all of this helps you integrate much more into the culture.
Right. I think that's. Yeah, I was mentioning this last weekend. I went to a new museum that I hadn't been to in Hong Kong after 12 years, and just kind of getting back to that, it does make you feel alive with where you live again. Just understanding the culture, going back to the restaurants, and I think that's a good thing for families to do as well, is to go back to some of those things that really show you what that city has to offer, and the culture that you can embrace. So before we move into the repatriation chat, do you want to ask if there's any questions about challenges or tips that you'd like to hear about regarding the arrival stage, moving from the honeymoon to some of the more challenging periods with family in the next move. Do we have any questions out there? We're good? All right. So we're going to move into repatriation. Now, you said there's another term for this now. Is that right?
Yeah. So we call it reintegration.
Reintegration. We're now moving into the reintegration phase of the chat.
So often people forget about repatriation, reintegration, and I think it's a really important part. And we're seeing more and more families obviously going back home. And going back home, what is home, really?
That's right. For a lot of people, it's 10 different places.
Exactly. So repatriation, reintegration programs are for adults as well as children.
Yes.
We've done some recent programs actually for families moving moving back from the Philippines back to the UK.
Right.
Now, interesting enough, like we talk about the children. I mean, the children have grown up in the Philippines. They've been to school in the Philippines. They're used to having a swimming pool in their back garden or whatever they've got. And suddenly they're moving to somewhere like Scotland,
right,
where the weather is very different. And of course, they're going to be missing their friends. But they've never actually lived in the UK, or they've never had that experience of going to school there. So repatriation programs for families are really important.
And does that typically take place right before they leave or right before they arrive?
Yeah, so ideally it's a nice time to do it just as they arrive into the new culture. So, because when you're leaving, there's so much to do.
There's going away parties, and we're in the thick of them right now.
Right. So the repatriation programs usually take place just before they just as they arrive.
Okay.
The sooner the better, of course, because then you can address some of those concerns as a family. Again, building new networks as well for the partner as well. Again, they're having to start again. So just really homing in, and even for the assignee as well, repatriation programs in the corporate world are important too. You've just learned a whole new set of skills out in Asia, and you're moving back to your home country. Is your job still the same?
Right.
What can you bring value into the job as well? So the repatriation programs are really focusing on bringing back skills back to the home country.
Right. Yeah. And what about for partners and children? What are the common concerns that they have once they do go home?
Okay. Well, there's lots of things. Like, a lot of them are worried about, how they're going to cope. It's different, a different lifestyle.
Right. That's true.
It's a very different lifestyle in Asia, as we know, right? But everyone manages it. Once you're in that situation, you manage it. But things like, for example, building that network of friends again.
Right.
And it does sound like it's not that difficult, but of course when you're living in a country in like UK or where the expat community is not as big as it used to be here in what you're used to here in Hong Kong, Singapore, it's a different kind of feeling, right? So partners do feel that, and also what are they going to do now? So that's again where the partner support program comes into place. It's building up a new network, perhaps maybe reapplying for jobs. You've maybe got a chance to work now, right? Again, but you've been out of work for some time. So what are you going to do to build on your skills?
That's right.
So in terms of having some assistance with a local coach, someone to work through with some of the things that you could do is a great way of reintegrating into society again.
And a lot of people change, right? So you live somewhere else for so long, you go back home, and you do feel like, I'm just going to zip right back into that.
Absolutely.
And then I think a lot of times that you see a lot of people say, actually, I'm quite different than I used to be.
Exactly.
I crave different things now.
Exactly.
So,
or you want to talk about you want to talk about things.
Yes.
And no one's listening to you.
Everybody's like, what? I think we've all experienced that.
Yeah, right.
So just kind of adapt and move on. But getting kind of the tips, and it's not always apparent what you should or shouldn't be saying. I think that's a big part of it. Are there any tips that you would have for families before they actually go, ways to make the transition a little bit easier, prep work?
Sure. We have got lots of tips on our website, but just to summarize, for example, moving, of course, children especially children, they want to take everything with them. You might want to just like sort of like pack a few things that they want and let them, manage their own unpacking and make them feel a little bit more at home when they get into the room and stuff. I know people, like, moving is very stressful, right?
Yes,
and you've got lots of things to take with you. But just sort of getting them involved in as much as possible is a great way of making the relocation a lot more smoother.
Oh, that's a good tip, yes. Okay, excellent. So repatriation, is there anything else that you want to cover in that area or stories that you might want to share?
I just kind of like, I think for example, we just did a program in Japan, which is interesting.
Okay.
Children that were born in Japan, but their families had to move to Australia. So they're born in Japan, but grew up in Australia and then repatriated back to Japan.
Okay.
That's an interesting case.
And that's.
So they've actually, learned a little bit of Japanese when they were younger. I mean, this is just an example. And the families, the family obviously were a little bit concerned. They've grown up in Australia. They've had the Australian way of schooling, and now they're going to Japan. And the kids were asking things like, why is it that the Japanese depict all the women in very childish way of manners and doing things?
Right.
So they're asking questions. So that in the cultural training, in the repatriation programs, you talk about what's important in the Japanese culture and why are these things. So kids get a chance to actually learn from a qualified trainer.
Gotcha. Yeah. There's so many different. I guess every story is very specific,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Every family is going to be different in terms of what their background is and the questions that they're going to be asking. So, excellent. Well, we want to thank you so much, Crown and Crown Relocation and Mobility, and Shylu here for sharing your insight in terms of relocation before, during, after, and of course repatriation, or what's the word again? Reintegration. I'm going to work on that one. But before we move on to just any extra questions, just want to hear from you guys. Do you have any questions around anything, Karina? All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us on Little Steps Live. Again, we're here every week talking about exciting topics, trending topics, and things that families are certainly going through and have questions on, such as the chat today, relocation, and just the big movement that's going on with families right now in prep for the summer months ahead. A couple of reminders: make sure that you do go into our events page on the on our Facebook page, which will provide the link in our comments there. You can click on it and just click interested in any of the upcoming Facebook Live events that we have going on. And of course, one thing to note is that this video will continue to be going through the system, through the algorithm over the next couple of days. So if you do have any questions for Crown, for Shylu, about relocation, about making that move, it can be personal, it can be specific, we'll have Shylu on board to answer those questions. So feel free to just put it in the comment there. So thank you again from Little Steps. We'll keep you in the know and on the go, and we'll continue to do so with our next sessions as well. See you later.